All right, guys, I want to follow up yesterday's assignment with a little bit of a lecture for today to give you some background on some of the stuff that you were doing. Um, so, so what we were doing, what we were starting is rights and responsibilities, and how rights that we have carry responsibilities. So, this idea that while you have the right to do this in our society or in our country, by law or by this right was granted to you by the Constitution, some of those carry some responsibilities and obligations that are expected out of you as citizens. So I want to talk a little bit about a couple of rights that were added later in amendments. We know when we think about rights, we oftentimes think of the Bill of Rights, but then there were some rights that were added in later amendments afterwards that we want to talk about here briefly before we get into responsibilities. And a lot of it will that we want to focus on comes from the 14th Amendment. And we know that the 14th Amendment granted citizenship to slaves, to former slaves. Okay. And one of the things that it also did was protect from abuses by state governments and local. And we want to talk about this idea of what is known as the doctrine of incorporation. And the doctrine of incorporation was that the rights that are guaranteed in the Bill of Rights, so everything that you think of in the Bill of Rights, all of those that protect citizens against federal government abuse, that applies to state governments and local governments too. It's not just in the federal, in the eyes of the federal law, that you have the right to free speech. Okay, that you have the right to free speech in Sandusky in the state of Ohio, and through the doctrine of incorporation, that's that idea that those should be guaranteed to you by both local and state governments also. And then I bring up two ideas that we discussed before, which is due process and equal protection. Due process, just a reminder, this right that you have rights in the arrest process, which is due process, a freedom of expression, and different privacy rights that are associated with due process. And then last is equal protection. And equal protection just comes down to this idea that you can't treat one group, quote unquote, different unless there's an overriding reason. Okay. And the overriding reason typically is not going to be something that's lawful. Um, that would be rare. So the idea that you treat women differently, the idea that you treat African Americans differently. Okay. That's that equal protection under the law for everyone. Okay. And then this, I'm not going to go through every single one of those amendments, but the idea of rights added in later amendments. Because remember, we had amendments that were uh, maybe change the process. You think like the 22nd Amendment, change the process of, how many terms a president can serve. That's not so much rights, but the 13th, 14th, 15th, so those 17th, 19th, 24th, 26th were ones. These were also amendments as examples that were added later on that extended rights to American citizens. So I want to talk about what's the idea of rights carry responsibilities, duties and responsibilities. You can think of duties as like if it's your duty to do something, it's more or less that you kind of have to, while a responsibility would be something that you're expected to do. And that's the real difference of those two. And then they're similar with what we're going to talk about with rights and responsibilities. So these duties of a citizen. So while you have these rights, you're kind of obliged, like we said, the duties part, to obey the laws, obey local, state, and federal government laws. Um, pretty obvious there. It's a duty for you to pay taxes. Okay, for all the things that are provided by government. So these different things that we have, whether it be our roads, our bridges, the unemployment benefits, food stamps, those types of things, all of those government programs, okay, are paid for by the taxpayer. So it's kind of a duty that American citizens pay taxes. Serving on a jury if called upon. Why is this? Because we want a jury of our peers. And also with that too, it's by law. So if you're called upon, you can't just not go to jury duty. Now, are there ways to get out of it? Absolutely. But you can't just not go. You can get a contempt of court charge with that. Attend school to get an education. We know that is something that you have to do. Why do we have this? First off, we don't want an uneducated society. And that's also by law too, right? We know what truancy is, and we know that if you don't fulfill that, you are breaking the law. And the last one isn't so much a duty, because you don't have to serve in the armed forces. We have a volunteer service. So it's not something, but if you were, let's say, like back in the day when you talk about like the draft, if you were called upon the draft, that would be something that would then be a duty. All right. But like we said, we have a volunteer force now, and we wouldn't foresee anything where we'd have a draft anytime soon. And then the last one I have on there too is to testify in court, testify in a court of law if called upon to present evidence. Remember, they could summons you to court. They could subpoena you to court to do this. And then if you don't show, you can be charged with contempt. They carry really hard maximum sentencing when you don't do this. They're probably not going to be what the sentencing is, but the possibility of serving a lot of jail time because of you. They want you to treat that role or that duty as something that is serious. Okay, responsibilities of citizens, things that you should do. So we're talking about staying informed about the activities of your local, state, and national government. So being aware, and it asks the question, why should you? Why should you be aware of what's going on? And I think that's pretty obvious, just the fact that a lot of people will complain about what's going on in their city, what's going on in their state, what's going on in their country, based off maybe a headline that they read. But staying truly informed on what it all entails is a lot different than just sitting there complaining. It's not that you don't have the right to complain. That's one of the things, right? That's one of the freedoms that we have. But staying informed is something that people should do. Voting in local, state, and national elections. We know that you don't have to vote, but we know that you should vote, and that is some pretty obvious reasons too. Okay, having a choice in those that represent you. We often complain about how they ignore our voice, but oftentimes people don't vote. Okay. Inform elected representatives about your issues of concern. This is one that most people don't do. They don't get involved to the point of where they're going to actually engage their elected officials. And I think that's a little harder. I think most people don't even know how to. So is it more of writing a letter or whatever it may be? But I think most people don't even know how to engage their local officials. And that's one of the bigger ones. So not so much do you want to, hey, I need to get the ear of the president, but the idea that you should maybe get involved in where your voice can be heard at the local level oftentimes. And you definitely have more say the more local that you get. And this one, they state this joining a political party, act as an independent voter. I think more, obviously you don't have to join a party, and I don't think it's responsibility of a citizen to join a party, but I think it's more or less understanding the issues, understanding where different parties stand and where different candidates stand. Candidates don't always stand right next to their party with what's going on, but understanding that as a part of the process is something that's important. Participate in local events, and that's more of, this could be anything from the July 4th celebration downtown to the Kids Fest that they have. And if you think about anytime you can have more of a sense of community, that's good for everyone. Okay, the more people can come together, as opposed to being separated. So that's the obvious why there. Serving government if elected or appointed. So obviously you'd have to run. Okay. And why would someone want to run? I mean, oftentimes they'll do it to make a change or to be involved in politics. Maybe it's that feeling of power that politics brings. Who knows why somebody's going to run, right? But hopefully at the end of the day, it's there to make a positive change on the community that they want to serve. And then last, help enforce laws by cooperating with the police. It's pretty self-explanatory in itself too. And just the idea of following the laws. Okay. So obviously you want them enforced justly. Okay. And the idea that also that they would be followed by citizens too. Okay. So the two-sided coin to that and how that works. And obviously if there's a good relationship between police and community, that can only be a good thing when it comes down to your everyday traffic stops and things like that hopefully can just be routine. So we talk about the relationship between. That's how we're going to end this. It says entitlements to privileges and immunities. And this is the idea of you must also respect the rights of others. So it's this idea of like the next one, the right to free speech. you're not always going to agree with everybody but they also have that right to engage in free speech themselves. So the idea of engaging in civil discourse, and being able to do it without an ugly confrontation or ugliness, as long as there's not a personal attack or like hate being spewed, like those types of things are obviously a little bit less tolerable. But if it's just a matter of people don't agree on politics, that's different. Okay. And that's okay that people don't agree, but being able to engage in that civil discourse and that conversation becomes important. Um, we talk about the right to bear arms. This was brought up with the assignment that you had to do. So knowing how to, obviously you have the right to bear arms, but knowing how to use the weapon, or the firearm, and that idea of proper licensure and going through all that steps, so that, because all it does when that doesn't happen is it just fuels, the side of the argument, of people's issues with them. So the idea of knowing what you're doing and how to handle becomes, uh, only makes sense, right? So right to a jury trial, understand why this is important. You don't want professional jurors. You don't want people that's what they do for a living. That's a good way for a lot of corruption to come in. And this is why, I mean, it's not like you don't have people out there that have had jury duty 17 times in their life. It's a rarity. You probably get called a couple times in your life, maybe 2, 3, who knows, maybe a little bit more than that, but very rare is it. Um, and it offers an opportunity to serve the community. It can be obviously a pain in terms of when it is and what it does to your work schedule. But as if you were someone who was in that seat, you definitely want it to be a jury of your peers, and so that you can have a fair trial, um, and so that the justice system works the way that it was originally intended to. And then we talked about the responsibility of being an informed citizen. So then using that right to vote and why that becomes important. Kind of already touched on that, so we don't have to talk about that one anymore. That is not the assignment. I'm going to stop it there. There's not an assignment here today. I appreciate you guys. Hopefully listening to this to the end. There will be, when we come back on Thursday, there will be, an assignment that's going to go with these notes. And so Wednesday, you don't have anything. If you did not finish yesterday's assignment, definitely get that done. That's due, this evening. And then anything else, take this time to get caught up by Thursday. And anything else that I know a lot of you didn't end up doing the work that I thought you might do over break, but I get it. And I appreciate it. And hopefully one day I can actually have a live class again too. So